the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast, hosted by 360 Energy. Today, we have our first guest on the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Bob Willard left an award-winning career as a senior management leader at IBM to pursue sustainability strategies for businesses. Bob is a sustainability expert, giving keynote presentations to corporate, government, university, and NGO audiences around the world. This episode is filled with industry knowledge and key points to get your organization on the right sustainability track. Now let's get into the episode with Bob. Welcome back, Dave and John. Bob, thank you for joining us as our first honorary guest.
We've been pounding this, as I've been told by our producer, we've been pounding the importance of the executive being involved on this because they haven't been. But what role should the executive or the board play as it relates to sustainability? Can you share from your experience, just so everyone has a better appreciation of the importance of them being involved and what they can do?
Yeah, it's absolutely critical that they be supportive and champions for some of the initiatives that are going to help the organization as well as help some of the issues that we're talking about. But if they're usually kind of risk averse and they don't want to bet the farm on something that is kind of new to them. So I think a lot of the way we get them on board is to describe the initiative as a pilot, put a fence around it. So we're going to try this in this part of the organization, in this part of the company, and measure the heck out of it, and make sure that we are doing it in a way that allows the benefits to come to us as well as to our stakeholders. Let's be smart about it. And if it works, we'll scale it up. And if it doesn't, we'll do something else. But put a fence around it. Get them more comfortable with the idea that they're going to support something which is a little different. So if we're encouraging them to go to renewable energy or keep track of their energy or stop emitting as many greenhouse gases as they are, then let's figure out where they are now, have a project which is going to take one part of the organization and really work it on that and see how far we can get with that. And then if it works, then do another project and another project, which is what, Paul did, up to 42 projects in 3 years, and now he's over 100. But they're one project at a time. He didn't start off saying, we're going to do 100 projects. He didn't say that. He did one at a time. Each of them was self-contained. Each of them was totally costed with a payback period and ROI associated with it before he did it. So the business mentality is still perfectly valid in this. We just have to be able to empower our employees and smart people who can help our employees to get us into this, to help put our toe in the water and try this out and see that it's not that uncomfortable after all, and that we can actually do this. So I think the executive role is to legitimize these kinds of things and provide an opportunity for the skunk works and the sandboxes and the organizations to actually kick in and get really creative about how they make this work for the company. I don't think they have any idea how much latent creativity and innovation is just waiting to be asked, just waiting to be asked. Just turn them loose. Put a fence around it, but turn them loose.
You've mentioned targets, metrics, and having overall goals. How does an organization measure its business effectiveness in implementing sustainability?
Yeah, the usual way is that they produce a report on how they're doing on these things. Usually the report has a couple of years of trend lines that they show. The way they measure it is pretty well established using some of the frameworks that are commonly used, Global Reporting Initiative or Integrated Reporting or CDP, which is very focused on carbon and water and forests and so on. How to do that and how to keep track of how you're doing on those things is relatively well established. So there are two problems, though, with a lot of what's going on. First of all, they cherry pick the things they want to report on, as opposed to the entire suite of things that they need to look at. And of course, they cherry pick the ones that they're doing the best on and have the most information about. That's human nature, right? So we need to encourage them to be a little bit more comprehensive in what it is they're looking at and take a look at how they're doing on all of them. And the second thing is that many of them kind of relax when they are rated as being ahead of the pack on any of these things. So corporate nights, as you probably are aware, every year, this organization called Corporate Nights, it's a magazine, it's also an organization that rates and ranks everything that moves, especially corporations. So they put out a list every year of the 100 most sustainable large companies, publicly traded companies on the planet. It's called the Global 100. And it shows as a percent score how they all did. So what you get is a list. About half of them you wouldn't recognize the names of. They're global companies. Some of them are holding companies. Anyway, it gives a list, and it shows in excruciating detail how it did the calculation on the 24 things that it looks at in order to make that assessment and where it got the data from. So if you were at the top of the list, if you were at the top of the Corporate Knights Global 100 list, you're probably saying, oh, hey, doesn't get much better than this. We're kind of done. You know, have some fun catching up, the rest of you. Unfortunately, though, they could very easily be the best of a bad lot. And none of them are anywhere close to where they need to be. So what we need to add to this complete suite of metrics are goals that are science-based goals of where they need to be, and measure them all against how close they are to those goals. You get the same result. You're ranking them as to who's closest and who isn't. But it's a very, very strong reminder that nobody has reached the goal line yet. And there's room for improvement for everybody, not just the laggards, the leaders as well. So I think we need to introduce science-based metrics. And there's something called science-based targets that's getting a lot of talk these days. Science-based targets are for greenhouse gases. Very, very important. Very, very important. But it's just for those. That's one of the 18 things we need to keep track of. We need science-based targets for the other 17 as well, and we've got them. So we just need to use them. So I think if we did the complete suite and we use science-based goals for all of them, and we compared progress towards those goals on an annual basis, I think it would really blow the smoke away from a lot of this stuff and make sure that we are keeping track of the things that really matter.
We know this is a very important task, and there needs to be a lot of people involved and supportive in that manner. But can you describe what role can suppliers play to assist their customers in advancing sustainability?
Yeah, usually the dynamics in the other direction. It's more the customers impacting their suppliers. But I don't think we should underestimate the influence that leading by example can have with a supplier. Suppliers are going to be recognized or acknowledged as being ahead of the pack on this stuff if their customers give them credit for their performance on sustainability. So one of the drivers in the market of more sustainable behaviors by everybody is what I call, or what everybody calls, sustainable procurement. And sustainable procurement says the buyer, the customer, wants to buy the most sustainable goods and services from the most sustainable companies, from the most sustainable suppliers. And they assign weight to how sustainable the supplier is in their bid appraisal process. And I'm strongly recommending at least 10% weight to make sure that it matters. In other words, you're given an opportunity as a supplier to convince your customer that you are actually more sustainable than your competitors are, and therefore you deserve more credit for that particular line item in the bid appraisal. So that means that suppliers need to be able to do that self-assessment. We're getting better with tools that help them do that, but we need to make sustainability matter to the supplier, because the buyer, whether it's public sector, could be the federal government, could be a municipality, could be a province, or a corporation, you know, big buyers, because they care. And I think that's really, really critical as a market force. Can the reverse happen? I think so. I think suppliers can coach their buyers into doing this kind of sustainable procurement process, but it may take a little time. If the buyer starts to send signals to its supply chains that this matters, all of a sudden, the attention that this gets in all of their supply chain is huge. And we saw that with Walmart. And it was around 2005, I think. Walmart sent out a 15-question questionnaire to all of their suppliers, 100,000 suppliers all over the world. And they said, would you please tell us how you're doing on energy? How much energy do you use? How much water do you use? How much waste do you generate? How much greenhouse gases do you emit? Do you know who your suppliers are? How are you treating your employees? Walmart. Anyway, so they were asking, a bunch of questions that start to sound a lot like sustainability related questions. Some of the suppliers were a little puzzled. Well, why are you asking us all these questions? And some of the bigger suppliers were quite indignant that they were being asked these questions. Like Procter & Gamble said, what the heck? I mean, you can ask us about the products and services that we provide to you, but you're asking about us. You're asking about us as a company. It's not your business. Government's going to ask us that stuff, but you're a company. Take a hike. And Walmart said, well, totally understand your point of view. And look, if you don't want to be one of our suppliers, you don't have to fill out this questionnaire. All of a sudden, P&G thought this was a heck of an idea. And the next year, they sent out a 12-question questionnaire to their 80,000 suppliers, asking them the same stuff. The reach of these large buyers is huge. And if you want to get the attention of a little supplier anywhere in the world, or a big supplier anywhere in the world, signal to them that it matters in how you are going to be assessed as a potential supplier to somebody who is important in your revenue stream. That's the second magic that happens. Money. I'll tell you. You follow the money and you follow the motivators.
Okay, I was going to ask one question, but listening to you, I'm changing the question I'm going to ask. I completely see where you're coming from in the idea that the CEO leads the organization, you get the why and the thing happens. But what if I'm a mid-level manager in an organization and I think to myself, I want this organization to do better in sustainability. What should I be doing if I was that mid-level manager?
You want to be careful. You need to be careful. Mid-level managers are the keepers of the culture of the organization. They're survivors. Some of them survive by keeping their heads down.
Yeah.
Some of them survive by being really, really good and innovative. But most of them don't rock the boat. So they want to be careful. They want to be respectful. And they would probably point less to what NGOs and others are saying about all of this, and more to what their competitors are doing. And if their competitors are starting to pay more attention to this and benefiting from that, then maybe this is something the organization should be looking at. Or there's an article in Harvard Business Review that says, companies like us should be looking at this. Do you think we should be maybe looking into this a little bit more? So you start with questions. We've been doing things this way and it's really worked for us really well, but man, there's some people that are saying that maybe there's some things on the horizon here that we should be looking at. And is our risk management system taking these things into account? Is this something maybe we should be paying more attention to? Would you like me to take a look at that? So you sort of get permission by asking a question to find out more that you probably already know anyway, but you're going to find out more and then bring it back and do it in a way that is framed as a proposal that if we wanted to explore doing a little bit more on this, this is what it might take. And this is what the business case, the cost benefit analysis of that project looks like. What do you think? And you start earning the trust of the people who are going to empower you, enable you to do this. You don't want to violate that trust. If it looks like you are becoming a tree hugger, it's going to make them a little nervous about your motivations. And you need to reassure them about every third sentence. If it's not good for the company, you shouldn't do it. But let's find out. So You start with questions, you're very respectful, you build on the foundation the organization already has, and you point to the outside rather than the inside as to where the drivers are coming from. You know, banks are starting to ask strange questions. Investors are starting to, these guys called impact investors, what's that? I hear the BlackRock is starting to make noises about all of this stuff. Man, like, should we be paying more attention to this? And point to all of those other sources, these external things, not you, external things. And what you're trying to do is to make sure that the organization is appropriately taking all of these factors into consideration as they're making their deliberations.
That sounds like a good game plan. And I've experienced of a number of companies where sometimes the people in the middle level are perhaps more aware and more conscious of what sustainability could do for the business than perhaps it is at the higher level. And I think sometimes there perhaps needs to be this pincer movement of somebody from inside driving things forward, as well as the external pressures.
But they need a green light.
Yeah.
They need a green light to do that. Actually, you know, after 10 years in leadership development in IBM Canada, you kind of pick up a little of this stuff and as to how to lead change. So I wrote a book about how to lead change from the middle, which is really what you're asking about. It's called the Sustainability Champions Guidebook. The steps that you take, the practices that you can use during those steps to give you a higher probability of success, strategies that you can use, paradoxes, and things that you should avoid, derailers that'll stop you dead in your tracks if you're not careful. So don't do these things, do these other things. So 7 steps, 7 practices, 7 paradoxes, and 7 derailers. And it's sort of a cheat sheet on how to lead change, any kind of change, but especially sustainability change. When you don't have position power to just do it, but you have to convince the people with position power that you should.
Yeah, that sounds useful. Thank you.
Bob, as a world-renowned expert in the field, I'm really grateful for the time that you spent with us. There's a lot of gold nuggets that have been spread out throughout this, so I'm very thankful for your assistance in this today.
Thank you for doing this. I'm amazed, David, at the leadership that you're showing in this arena. It's just wonderful that you are going far beyond what most organizations would do to try to educate, help people adopt a mindset that's more supportive of these things for good reasons. And it's exciting. I think the timing is good. I think the readiness of chambers of commerce, of boardrooms, of all of these different important groups is a lot higher than it was before. Maybe out of the risk driver more than the opportunity driver, but I don't care, whatever works. And in fact, I described some of these forces, the pushback forces and the forces that are pushing us in the right direction in a white paper that I wrote earlier this year called the 21st Century Sustainable Enterprise Force Field, the forces that are trying to get us to where we want to get to and the forces that are always pushing back. And it's a kind of a hopeful paper because I think we're getting amplification of all of the helping forces these days from these big stakeholders like bankers and buyers and investors. And if they care about it, all of a sudden it matters.
So I think we'll make sure we put the links to what you've described in our information when this goes out as well. So thank you for that, Bob.
Okay.
Over to you, Lysandra.
Thank you so much, Bob, for joining us today. I can confidently say myself, Dave, John, and our listeners have learned so much from you. Pass it off to John. Any final comments?
What I do think is, I think it's fantastic to see somebody who's come from almost the ultimate corporate background like IBM to be talking about change in the way that you are. And I think most of it, and I don't mean this to decry anything you said, but most of it makes real common sense. But as somebody once said, common sense is the least common of senses. And I think that's part of the problem that we have corporately.
We're working on it.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Bob, for your time. It was great meeting you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Bob.
Take care.
Have a great day.
That's all for today's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check us out on our website at 360energy.net and follow us on LinkedIn at 360 Energy Inc. Tune into our podcast on Apple Music and Spotify by searching the 360 on Energy and Carbon. You can watch the video recording and subscribe on YouTube at 360 Energy Inc. See you next week.